There's no reason why you have to do what everybody else is doing. Today's video is about following your own destiny. It's about independence. It's about freedom. It's about creativity. What I'm going to recommend today is very non-standard. You will not see it in many places. You will be perhaps the only person in your pool using this flop strategy, but it can be devastatingly effective, and I'm going to show you why in this video. Let's go. Well, guys, one of my favorite quotes, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before, is from Mikhail Tal, who was a Soviet chess player in the sort of 60s and 70s, was probably him at his peak. And he said that you want to lure your opponent into a deep, dark forest where 2 + 2 = 5, and the path leading out is only wide enough for one. So Tal's idea was create a position on the chessboard that's so utterly complex that your opponent has no idea what's going on, but you do. Now, you might wonder, how might we set up a similar thing in poker? And the answer is that we can lure our opponent into nodes that we've studied that they haven't. And this new flop strategy I'm going to show you today, it's maybe not new, it's something that you'll see solvers do sometimes, but it's probably new to you. Like, I'm willing to bet that the majority of you watching this don't ever do this. And that strategy is overbetting the flop. And before we embark on a spot like this, we've opened the King 10 here, big blind is defended. Before we embark on a line like this, we want to have some idea what we're doing. Unlike me in game here, because I just pressed a hotkey that I thought was 75% pot, which is my normal sizing here, and it was the PokerStars hotkey, but this is GG. I was playing on this morning to record this footage, and so I accidentally overbet the flop. But then I thought, well, this isn't a bad thing to do. My hand is definitely okay for overbetting the flop in an overbet strategy, so at least we've not blundered any EV. And our opponent started thinking, as you can see here. And when they started thinking, I thought, okay, they don't have bottom of range. They probably have some kind of continue. And they called. And we're going to talk about what happened on the turn here in just a second. You guys can start thinking about what you would do here and why. But the important point, I think, is to establish two things when you're exploring a new strategy like this. Like, we talk about these things in Lecture 8 of Grade E of the Carrot Poker School, or is it Lecture 5? It's one of those two. I think it's Lecture 5, where we discuss inventive lines to take people into the deep, dark forest, essentially, right? The first thing you want to do when you're vetting a line to see if you like it is to just make sure that it's not a big theoretical EV loss. So the first thing we're going to do here is hop over to Pio Solver and look at the EV for the cutoff here when we use a B33, and then look at the EV for the cutoff when we use an overbet, right? So we're going to look at those and make sure there's no big difference. And then the second thing we're going to do is what we call next node analysis, where we jump into the solver and say, how's the opponent meant to react, and what are they going to get wrong in these kinds of situations? And then, do we have an exploitative reason to actually adopt the strategy? Because if we think villain's going to play perfectly against it, there's not really a reason to do it, right? So let's have a look at Pio Solver now. Okay, so the number we're looking at here is this IP EV, which is the EV for the in-position player on this flop when checked to. And this number is in chips. It's basically 3.3 big blinds, 33 chips. It's the 5-10 structure we've used in this sim. And we can see here that this is basically just a B33, right? 18 chips into a pot of 55. This is about a third pot. That's the sizing we're looking at here, and we're entitled to 33 chips out of 55. So we're not too bothered about looking at this strategy. The only thing I want to point out here is that this is not a range bet strategy. If we run this as a range bet, the EV is going to drop. And some people do that. That's about making life easier for yourself, right? I'm going to range bet to make life easier on me. I would urge you to try and make life hard for your opponents while learning a more unique strategy for a lot of nodes, right? Flop is one of these places where, because nothing really matters that much, you're free to go ahead and start stirring the soup here and mixing stuff up and creating unfamiliar landscapes thereafter. You just want to make sure that you study the landscapes that you plan on creating, because, you know, your opponents won't have. Nobody is sitting there studying how to react to flop overbets, because it's not in their interest to study that, because that's something they hardly ever face. But you can be the wolves in sheep's clothing. You can be the one poker player that actually overbets the flop in your pool on the right textures. You do need to know a bit about which textures you shouldn't do it on, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But first, let's take a look at the EV for overbetting now on Queen 9-6. Okay, boom. Look at this. Kaplow. The EV went up. You've improved your strategy by like some minuscule shred of the pot by overbetting. But of course, this isn't the point. We're not doing this because Pile Solver stopped at this level of accuracy with these exact parameters, happens to think it's minusculely, is that a word? It's very slightly better to overbet than it is to use 1/3. That's not why we're doing it. But what we can prove by looking at that EV here for this overbet strategy, this is now 82 into 55 of B150, is that overbetting is at least not theoretically worse than just using B33. Now, if you run this in GTO Wizard, you're going to be looking at 97 different strategies, different sizes. And the EV will be something like this. And I would recommend that you don't try to use 97 different strategies. Probably won't be that many. But there'll be multiple sizes. I am a big proponent of never using multiple sizes on the flop. I don't think it's at all necessary. I think later on in the game tree it does become necessary. Here, it's not. So what does this look like? Well, you can look at a hand like the one we actually had here, which was the gutter with the spade, and this hand is basically like a pure overbet. So, my instinct here that my misclick had been an okay one is definitely correct. How else do we build this? Like, how easy would it be for you to build this? Because there's a few cornerstones here. One is, how easy is it for me to do? The second one is, how unfamiliar and difficult is it for the opponent to face? The third one is, how scary is it for the opponent, and how much will you ruffle their feathers and make them feel like prey, like running away from you, the rampant hyena, chasing down the poor defenseless antelope. Antelopes are pretty defenseless, right? I think so. So you're going to be the hyena, or maybe not, maybe a wolf, right? Or maybe like an animal that doesn't hunt in a pack, like a tiger, right? That hunts alone. That's where you're going to be, like the lone hunter or huntress here. And you might also want to think about how sexy a red line this strategy would give you, right? When you go on a date, right? The main thing you do is you produce your red line for your date, right? So you sit down at the dinner table, your date says, oh, so, I work in law. I'm a law attorney, blah, blah, blah. What do you do? And you just whap out the red line. You're like, bam! This is what I do. Fucking overbet flops. Bro. And you can bro people as well. Like, if you play the strategy, you can bro your opponents. You can literally just be like, bro, like into the chat as you do this. So there's many, many reasons to do this. But the first and most important one is definitely that you're not suffering some kind of EV loss in theory by doing this. As we can see here, we're not. We have technically more EV than if we use the 1/3 strategy. Okay, so how easy is it for us to do? The thing you've got to get good at when you do this is you've got to remember that there are low EV bluffs in such a strategy, not just high EV bluffs, right? There are also hybrids. 6-5 suited is a hybrid. When you do this, when you overbet with this hand, villain will fold better, villain will call with worse, and villain will fold hands that are very live, right? So if you just look at that for a second, villain's going to fold 7s and 8s, villain's going to call you with, let's say, a straight draw of some sort, and villain is also going to fold stuff that's just really live against you, such as, I don't know, ace 10 of clubs or something that just has a ton of EV. So there's just reasons to do this with these low pairs as well. You don't want to be too polarized that you ignore the hybrid bets, and you don't want to be too fussy with your bluff standards that you ignore the low EV bluffs like the king 7 or the ace 4 of clubs or something. When you have or even hearts or diamonds, when you have the overcard to the queen, you can usually do a good bit of overbetting here, right? So that's really all it takes. Now, will there be some hands that are too hopeless for you to bet here? Not really, because even backdoors like 5-4 are still able to do this, because the amount of fold equity you're going to get proportionately on the flop in a favorable world for your range, such as this one, where, as we saw, you are entitled to more than the pot by far in terms of equity, but even more so in terms of EV. What that means is that you get enough fold equity. You're getting 63% fold equity here. 60 would be like MDF, pot odds norm, right? You're getting 63% in theory. In practice, you may get more, you may get less. We'll look at that. But there's every reason to suppose that this is just a spot where you don't have to be super fussy. Now, if you're playing the same opponents a lot of the time and you're not trying to play exploitatively on the flop, you might want to be a bit careful with your frequencies, right? You might want to say, okay, when I'm doing this with something like Queen Jack, because I am overbetting, I'm not allowed to, sorry, Queen Jack is actually top pair, but the same thing stands. Let's say Jack 10, I'm not allowed to do it every time. I actually have to have some semblance of balance here, and I have to control my frequencies. I need to make sure that my checking range isn't totally weak. All of these things are going on range versus range here. But on a hand versus range level, how does this actually perform? What's villain meant to do here? Well, they're meant to fold certain 9x immediately. That might be tricky for people, so I can see some over-defending happening there. But then again, there are some other hands here that I think are not so clear. So when villain has a hand like, let's say, a flush draw, or, yeah, let's just go with a flush draw for now. That seems pretty simple. There is a bit of raise that villain's meant to find there. I don't really know whether it'll be more often or less often. I'd imagine people go into their shell and don't really raise this enough. That'd be my guess, is that ace-7 is not getting pure raised. Ace-5 is not getting pure raised. Solver's being really specific about which ones it wants to raise here. I wouldn't worry about that too much. 6x probably not going to be raised enough. 6-5, etc. Not going to be raised enough. 9x probably a bit over-defended. Queen x is actually meant to fold sometimes. Definitely a bit over-defended. So what you can really predict here is that the bigger your sizing gets and the more good-looking hands and absolute hand strength terms your opponent is meant to fold immediately, the less it's going to be folded, the more it's going to be over-continued. So I would guess that the first street here is over-continued. There's too much top pair in there. There's too much second pair. There's too much, like, open-ender or something that's just not willing to fold yet, because, like, who the hell wants to fold an open-ender to a flop c-bet? So one way you could go with this is that you could go hyper-exploitative and say, when I've got a good hand, I'm going to overbet. Now, this is a very transparent face-up strategy, but it's obviously very good, right? Because when you go small, we know that populations at low stakes and micro stakes under-raise and overfold, but when you go huge, they over-continue. So actually, lo and behold, when you have pocket kings here or something in your own range, you might just always want to overbet against an unknown opponent. Now, this is getting very, very vacuumy. It's like you just have to play your hand right now against your opponent's range and strategy. I get it. If you're playing a big sample, you know you're playing against the same people. You don't just want to be like playing an absurdly face-up strategy like this long term. But there's reason to think that even if your opponent does over-continue on the flop, they may be overfolding on certain turn cards. For example, let's look at what happened in the hand here, and then we'll go back to this sim and have a look at a few different turns. So in the hand, we overbet this flop. The opponent started thinking, indicating that they have one of these hands that they should maybe continue. And then we get to this turn card. Now, my thinking on this turn card was, well, I have a very natural looking bluff, a very high EV bluff. The ace of spades in particular didn't look like a terrible card for me. I do know that villain, in some of these nodes where you've overbet the flop, is meant to develop a leading range, right? Because they're so flush draw heavy. We saw in the sim that they start to fold a lot of their top pair, second pair, third pair, pocket pair. The hands that you guys are used to being in this continuing range against the B33 are folding en masse against the B150. So what that means is that the range that calls the flop gets rather weighted towards flush draws. And so this ace of spades, if this was a random ace, this is really, really good, right? Because villain's folding a ton of their ace-x on the flop. Okay, it does hit their nut flush draw, but that's about it. But on the ace of spades, they do have quite a lot of flushes now, which probably means that on a spade, we're not in that favourable a world compared with certain other overcards. I think better cards for us would be like the random king, the random offsuit ace, stuff like that. The brick, to some extent, is okay because our nut advantage is really preserved. And I'd put it to you that if you start blasting turns on bricks, because they've over-defended the flop, they're probably going to have to overfold the turn, right? They're going to have way too many low EV hands now. And I would put it to you on this card that that's a bit less true because they just have natural flushes and like stuff with a flush draw now, queen x with a spade, etc. That's an easy continue. But this hand I still think is going to be okay to bluff. So we went for the bluff here with king of spades, 10 of diamonds, which looks like a really, really frequent one. I think the raise frequency here is going to be tiny in equilibrium, so I'm not so worried about being raised. Villain does fold this time. The river would have been the 5 of diamonds, because of course you always have to click that because you're conditioned by GG Poker to do so. By the way, for anyone wondering, oh, you know, he's back on GG now, he's playing stars the other day. I don't know why you guys get upset about someone like playing on different sites. I don't know which place is best to like do a big volume challenge. GG, you know, the rake is higher, the pool is softer. Stars, the rake is lower, the pool is tougher. I don't know yet, man. I've not really decided, but I'm just making content for now, okay? So please don't think I'm sitting here grinding 60,000 secret hands on GG. I'm not doing that. We've not started that yet. But I don't know. Sometimes I just like to dabble and see which pool I think is best. I'll make a decision eventually. You guys can let me know what you think in the comments if you've got advice on where you think a large sample should be played for the challenge, right? You let me know. I'm not sold on either site yet. So the thing is here, this overbet strategy is going to lead to unfamiliar turn and river nodes for villain as well. So let's take a little bit about the turn, because when you're studying a strategy on the flop, you don't just want to stop there. You want to think about turn play as well. You want to look at the nodes that commonly follow from there. Well, the solver thinks that this turn card is actually pretty terrible for our range, right? Because our EV is now only 108 chips out of 219. That's less than half the pot if my math is correct. So this is not a great turn card for the in-position player's range, and it's also reflected in this bet frequency, which is absolutely minuscule. And the reason for this, whenever you get a turn barrel frequency of 8.8%, the reason for it is that the other player was meant to donk bet, but I haven't enabled donk bets here because I don't think Pool's going to donk bet. So Pool is going to make the same mistake that I've forced the solver to make here of not actually building the donk bets on this turn, because they just have so many flushes, right? Like a large percentage of their flop calling range, all of this stuff over here is flushes. Maybe a better way to illustrate that is to see this in terms of EV. There's a lot of dark green hands here, more than normal, because out of position has been forced to call the flop with so few pairs and gutters, etc., and so many flush draws by comparison, because when you face a bigger sizing and your pot odds get worse, flush draws start to become a larger part of your range because other stuff just has to fold. So I was, I guess, right in thinking that I could bet my hand. I didn't fully appreciate just how often I was meant to check back here. And this checking back 91% of the time, this is exploitative in a sense, because the opponent has missed their opportunity to lead on the turn. And humans will miss that opportunity all the time. So already, a natural benefit of overbetting the flop, of playing the strategy, other than the extra minuscule amount of EV that Pio says it nets, is just, as I said, to be able to show your red line on the first date with that girl you're going to go out with, right? You get to show the red line. But joking aside, people are going to miss the donk bets, the really obscure, weird strategies that follow from here. What if the turn was a brick though, right? What if we got a turn like the deuce of hearts? What's the EV of that? It's going to be higher, right? 121 out of 219. This is now a favourable world for range. And in equity terms, it's not going to be favourable. We only have 46% equity, but the EV is higher because of the large nut advantage. Look at all of our green hands and look at out of position. Look what's happened to their monopoly of flush draws now. The EV has plummeted to like 1/5 of the pot, 40 chips out of 219, because these are, of course, low equity hands. So ranges are very asymmetric in this spot, and an inability to react to that asymmetry is going to define the leaks that we can expect from the pool. Now, we know they've over-defended flop here, so when we use this second overbet, and we just start piling way more money in the middle, they're going to get here with even more second pair, even more jack 10 that they have to fold, even more top pair. So it's not that, oh no, it's bad to overbet the flop as a bluff. Like, okay, it maybe slightly underperforms with the lowest EV bluffs in your range, but if you make up for that by aggressing the turn even more often than the solver thinks, and again, look out for low EV bluffs, look out for hybrids, 6-5, same thing as it was on the flop, folds from better, calls from worse, folds from live stuff that's behind, and then look at these hands up here, ace-4 of hearts going for it, king-5 of diamonds going for it, king-3 unblocking the folding range, overcard to the queen, blocker to king-queen, going for it, not blocking folding range because most king-x folded flop already, going for it, right? So learning how to play the turn here and how to be aggressive enough is part and parcel to overbetting this flop. If you're going to start overbetting flop and then going, I need a flush draw to bet the turn. Oh noes, I don't have a flush draw. If only I had a flush draw, I would have bet the turn. Then you're not going to get on very well with the overbet strategy. You're meant to get MDF now because things are a bit more neutral in terms of equity, range versus range. So villain is meant to fold around MDF. That's tough when you've landed here with too much second pair that doesn't want to call again. Okay, some people may get stubborn and just start calling you down here, but it'll be really rare. The amount of people that get to showdown successfully against your line here is going to be very few and far between. So I'm not saying from this video you have to start overbetting and triple barreling and stuff like that, but what I am saying is that if you do adopt this strategy, you're going to start luring your opponents out of their comfort zone. Why play a node that everybody else has studied, right? When I start ramping up volume and I pick a pool to do that in, and I fully commit to doing that, I'm going to start playing loads of non-standard lines, because you've really got to go above and beyond these days to have a big win rate in poker. It's not enough to just do the same thing that everybody else is doing to simplify the game for yourself. That's not enough, because you've got to beat a ton of rake. The rake in this game is like 8 or 9 BB per 100. It's something like that. If you play lower stakes on GG Poker, the rake is even worse. It's like, it gets up to like 12 BB, I heard, at like 25 NL. This is insane. Maybe you just shouldn't play games with 12 BB per 100 rake. Okay, fair enough. But wherever you play, for the most part, there's going to be a trade-off, right? Like the rake's going to be high, or the game's going to be tougher, or maybe the software is going to be like playing on teletext in 1996. My editor won't know what teletext is because he's like 19 or something. But you know, you don't want to know what it is, editor. You don't want to know what teletext is. Trust me, it sucked. And there's still some poker software out there that's like that sucked. So in fact, I bet none of you even know what teletext is, apart from like the boomers in the audience. Let me know in the comments if you do. I feel kind of young, by the way. I did the clean shave thing for the first time in a long time. I don't even have the 5 o'clock shadow yet, or maybe I do slightly, but I didn't realize that I still looked this youthful. This is just like testament to the fact that when you don't like work a manual job and you sit behind a screen talking about cards all day, you preserve youth. Maybe. Or maybe it's just delusional. I do actually look old, and I just don't think so. So I'm used to seeing myself with my white beard. Anyway, I digress. This hand with kings, this is a cool spot, right? So again, we're on the flop. And again, I pressed the B75 button. I pressed it, but it was the overbet button because it was the wrong site. And again, I accidentally made an overbet that's really good, but now we know this is really, really good, right? Because we've seen in Sims how people over-defend here. Villain's going to have to start folding hands that look really good here. Like with sixes, they're going to be like indifferent depending on suits or something, right? I haven't simmed this one, but I would guess. So this is a situation where overbetting the flop, again, lures people out of their comfort zone. And, you know, not to sound like a broken record, but again, it's going to lead to some turn nodes that are really unfamiliar for the opponent. So villain starts tanking. Again, we have this idea that they've not whiffed. They don't just have an easy fold. They're going to have to find raises on this board, by the way. This is definitely a board where they do want to find some raises, I would think. More so than the last one. The turn is Ace of Hearts. I can only imagine that the Ace of Hearts is a meh card for my range. Like, I don't have a ton of Ace-X in my flop overbet range. I do have some. I probably build more around, like, the overcards that have less showdown value and backdoor straight draws, though, like Queen Jack, Queen 10, Jack 10, King Jack, etc. when I'm bluffing flop. Also, the Ace of Hearts brings the backdoor if villain is floating me with like a bad pair on the board or with some kind of like 6-5. It's more likely to be 6-5 of hearts here. Although arguably maybe 6-5 of clubs is also a call. I don't know. I need to study this more before I implement it. But I am strongly leaning towards implementing a flop overbet strategy on the boards where we're allowed to. The rest of this hand isn't super eventful. The Queen of Diamonds comes on the river. Villain decides to check again. And I think we have a very, very easy check on the Queen of Diamonds. I think it would be far too thin to get greedy here and try and go for value. I do think Villain's range is quite 9x heavy at this point, but they can also play an ace this way. They can also play some trap this way. It's not uncommon at all to go for check raises on flush rivers. I don't think Pool finds that enough, no, but it'll happen sometimes. In any case, Kings is a clear check. Villain had Jack 9. And yeah, the moral of the story here is just that, okay, this turn came, it stopped us value betting. But building huge pots with a big nut advantage is just never a bad thing. Luring people out of their comfort zone is never a bad thing. Creating problems you're more familiar with than your opponent is never a bad thing. And being able to show a sexy red line on a first date is never a bad thing because it's probably going to get you laid, yeah? Or at the very least, you'll be able to take that red line about the place later if the date doesn't go well, and you'll be able to put it in people's face and go, bro, like this. That's what you want to do. So in any case, this can't be a bad idea. I'm not forcing you to implement this. There are flops you would not want to implement this on if the flop comes ace, ace, 4. Villain is hyper polarized by that flop to an ace or something quite bad usually. So no, you don't want to build an overbet strategy on ace, ace, 4. But as long as the flop is preserving to some extent of nut advantage, and we talk about how to recognize these flops right back in grade 1, lecture 6 of the Carrot Poker School, that I mentioned you can get 3 months subscription free, by the way, when you pick up our full scholarship or theory scholarship right now at Carrot Corner. You can. There you go. But yeah, we talk about that a lot there. And when you recognize the spots where you have a nut advantage, overbet's viable. It's not going to be an EV loss in the solver. And imagine you just spent a month studying this and became a beast at it and you knew all the nodes that followed and nobody else did. That would have to benefit your win rate. Guys, loyal viewers of this channel, let's stop doing things that everybody's doing. Let's stop this kind of scared approach of like, oh, it's so confusing. I need to make it easier for me. I need to make everything simple for me. by doing the same thing everybody else is doing. This is about EV. This isn't about how comfortable you feel. Maybe you should go through a bit of discomfort of learning something new so that you can have a surprise weapon in your inventory and so that you can have a sexy red line. There are other things you could start doing as well, by the way. You could adopt strategies such as 3x probing the turn, 3x pot probing the turn. These are called sidelines in Carrot Poker School Grade E. Find some sidelines at some point in your career. I get it, if you're at an early stage, you still just want to study for a while. Fair enough, you want to get your game up to speed before you do anything like this, but I would say before you put in a ton of work playing mainstream strategies, you should learn some sidelines to really be the wolf in sheep's clothing, to be that predator in the pool that, you know, grabs people out of their comfort zone and pulverizes them. I hope this video has been useful to you, and if you liked it, I can do more strategies that will blow your mind, more sideline strategies very soon. Check out carrotcorner.com for our subscriptions. Jared Alderman, the mental game coach, the meditation guru, launched this week. You can find his first 3 videos there now, and I will see you back here on YouTube for more free content soon. Much love, guys. Take it easy. Bye bye.